free Bardzell. So Jeff and Joanne came to us yesterday. They drove all the way from Indiana. So Jeff is an associate professor of HCI and design in the School of Mathematics and Computer Science at Indiana University. His research examines both design theory and emerging IT use practices. So his work on design theory in particular then focuses on critical design, research through design, and design criticism. His research on emerging IT use practices includes, for example, critical empirical studies on maker communities in both the United States and Asia, and this is also work that Jeff, Joanne, and I have been collaborating on. It also includes intimate and sexual interaction and online creative communities research. Jeff draws on the history of criticism, critical theory, and analytical aesthetics to understand how concepts, materials, forms, ideologies, and creative processes achieve coherence in design objects. And he's also currently the co-editor of Critical Theory and Interaction Design with MIT Press and co-author of Humanistic HCI. And he's also currently working on a monograph tentatively entitled Design as Inquiry. So please join me in welcoming Jeff.
Thank you for the nice introduction, Sylvia. It's kind of difficult to do a presentation right after a 10-minute slide critique. Because I am now keenly aware of all the screw-ups that I have in the following 45 minutes that I can do nothing about. So I'll just apologize in advance for my final slide, which has lots of logos. There's absolutely nothing about the content of my talk today, but what we can do is just hit the back key if you just help me remember that. Anyway, my talk today is Design as Inquiry. This is based on a book project I'm working on, but also about 10 years of research that I've been working on designs as objects of inquiry, which reflects my background in the humanities. And I think it's actually really fortuitous that I get to follow up on Andrea, because so many of the sorts of issues, so many of the things that she did right and that she did well, and that we can all understand why they were done right and why they were done well, are precisely the sorts of things that we really struggle to perceive when we say we're doing design as a form of research. What is the research question? What is the research method? What are the findings or the results? What are the take-homes? All those things that her presentation was structured around and very explicit. Those are precisely the things that it's really tough to do if you're doing design as inquiry. And so that then becomes sort of the problematic that I want to work with. I did get this right, so you can see a little of my personality, a little bit of color come through on this. Just some funny pictures of me, but also just by way of introducing myself. Sylvia's already done, so I won't dwell on this further. I do like Hello Kitty. I think you should too, but I won't get into that for now. So what I've been working on a set of, I think these are all deeply related issues: research through design, design practice-based research, critical design, constructive design, speculative design. There's a bunch of different names for it. And I think all of these have some basic issues in common, which is the argument, the claim that a design itself is a form of research. Like in the way that a book or a research paper can present research, so too can a design do that. And that of course is what makes this difficult. So these are some of the questions then. I'm not the only one asking these. The whole community is asking these questions. And sorry, I'm not really going to answer them very well today, but I'm going to do some work to try to show the directions towards some answers that I've been thinking through. But how could a design be a form of research? How might a design as research relate to other forms of research, such as science, social science, or philosophy? I mean, what sorts of knowledge can arise from design? And most people, when they talk about research through design, they point back to a seminal paper from the 90s by Christopher Frayling from the Royal College of Art, who defines it as a form of inquiry where, quote, the end product is an artifact, where the thinking is, so to speak, embodied in the artifact, where the goal is not primarily communicable knowledge in the sense of verbal communication. One of the challenges, though, is that this seminal article is also 5 pages. So it's quite short, and it's very provocative. It's very amazing. It's really influenced my thinking in deep ways. But what it's lacking is really, he doesn't tease it out. He doesn't build up an argument to explain it. So it's just sort of pointing or sketching. So the arguments aren't there to be found. So this is a definition that I would like to offer. This is not intended to be a genius, clever, blow you away definition. This is intended to be a meat and potatoes descriptive definition that actually makes some sense. So I understand design as inquiry as the practice of fabricating and also commonly showing or deploying objects in a way that substantively reflects one or more mature traditions of fabrication and showing or deploying, such as product design, fine art, interaction design, speculative fiction, traditional craft, for the purposes of doing inquiry. Okay, so my underlying assumption, and the argument I'm going to try to build out, is that I do believe, I'll just say this, yes, I do believe that design can be researched. I do believe in the possibility, at least, of research through design, however problematic the practice may be at the present moment. And that I'm committed to, and I'm going to try to justify that a little bit. But this particular claim faces certain forms of skepticism. And I don't think this skepticism is malicious. I don't think people are just being mean or something. But I think skepticism is part and parcel of how the research community operates. So that we challenge people's methods, their data, their inferences, their interpretations. We evaluate designs and prototypes according to accepted standards and heuristics and criteria. We ask people for justifications. And so it's perfectly appropriate and perfectly normal business to bring this attitude of academic or scholarly skepticism to designs as well. And I'll just add this one other thought. Skepticism is going to be a running theme today because it's been a very hot topic in philosophy. Going back to Descartes and solipsism, you saw the matrix, so you know the basic formulation of skepticism. How do I know that I'm not taking the red pill, or I can't remember which pill is which. But how do I know that I'm not just hallucinating all of you? And this continues all the way through to the present. And it plays out in some interesting ways, and I'll try to reveal some of that today. But definitely skepticism will be one of my running themes. But what are the forms of skepticism? These are the sorts of questions that I commonly hear posed to people who are defending research through design. How could a design be researched? What exactly can be known through a design? Can a design be verbally paraphrased? Can it be generalized? Does it present facts or evidence? Does it argue from premises to conclusions? Does it offer a transparent account of its knowledge processes? Is knowledge an outcome is knowledge as an outcome of design verifiable? Is it replicable? And I think all of us could say, with Andrew's presentation, I think all of us would be able to have a sense for how we would respond to these questions. Or if we had an issue, how we would pose it to her, and how we think she would probably respond to us. So again, it's appropriate to ask these questions of design. And I think if we don't answer these questions well, if we try to dismiss them or say, well, design's a different kind of thing, and you're asking the wrong questions, or these are nonsense questions, I think we face some really big consequences that are very unfortunate. One is that design as inquiry is not even perceived as research by key members in the community or whole constituencies of the community. And if that's the case, then tenure cases, dissertations, grant proposals, even PhD degrees themselves run the risk of losing their legitimacy or not being recognized or acknowledged as research. And that means people don't get funded, people don't get students, and people cannot pursue this work. And of course, more broadly, as sort of an epistemic statement, what it means is that IT research continues to be pursued in ways that it has been pursued for a while in more traditionally acceptable ways, including social science and other work like that. And so the potential for research through design to be a part of that conversation is diminished. So I think it's really urgent that we answer these questions. Too bad I won't, but I'll try. My proposition is that the knowledge potentials of design thinking, processes, prototypes, and products needs a better articulation if anybody is to accept it as inquiry. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about my method, because I do have a methodology here. I'm not just making stuff up. Well, not entirely making stuff up. And I want to talk through it because this is a bit different. So the first part, I'm going to talk about it in 3 different parts. The first part I'll refer to as the plumbing, which is what I'm trying to do is I'm surveying the history and philosophy of art, literary theory, art history, and so on, for arguments that assert that an artwork does inquiry. And this goes, you can find this all the way back to Plato. There's a very rich tradition of people arguing that arts do or do not constitute a form of inquiry, or that they do something for us. I actually think a lot of those questions that Andrea faced about photographs and photography actually are in this genre. I think those are probably harder questions for her to answer than some of the other questions, and I think it's obvious why. Photographs are not as easy to read, perhaps, as for example, a semi-structured interview data is. So I'm just collecting an inventory of those claims. I have dozens, maybe over 100 by now, of individual claims where this work does inquiry because it does this. So we learn this from that. Yes?
When you say it does inquiry, you mean it poses a particular question or answers?
Well, I'm going to get to that because, yeah, so the question was, in case you didn't hear it in the back, what do I mean when I say it does inquiry? Does it ask a question? Does it answer a question? And yeah, yes. Maybe because it asks a question, maybe because it answers a question, maybe because it clarifies something. I'll get to it. There's actually different. Part of what's at stake is how tightly or broadly we scope our understanding of inquiry. So I'll definitely come back to this question much more later. So I'm constructing an inventory of these kinds of claims. I'm grouping, categorizing, and critiquing these claims and kind of kicking their tires, trying to get a feel for which ones resonate, which ones feel like they're doing some interesting work. And when ones come forward that kind of do strike me as interesting, then I actually try to interrogate them side by side with actual designs. So I get designs and I actually try to say, what might one learn from this design? How does this design do inquiry? If I had to defend this design as research, what sorts of arguments would I want to make about that? So that's the first part. And an example of this, and I have a blog post I just published a couple days ago that does this. You can look, it's interactionculture.wordpress.com. The criterial knowledge argument for research through design. And basically my strategy is I state the position. This particular notion comes from philosophy of literature. A philosopher named John Gibson published a book in 2007 who developed this theory using Wittgenstein. And he says that literature does inquiry because it does this work. I won't get into the actual work. But then once I've fleshed out his argument and understood that argument, then I apply that to a design and try to explore the ways that the design might do that kind of inquiry. Okay, so that's the first part. The second part so far most of the discourse is basically from the humanities, which I've been reading some contemporary designs with. But I don't want to lose sight of what people in our field are talking about. So the second part is to really survey research through design, critical design, speculative design, design fiction, all the research that I can find in HCI especially, but also in design, that talks about these things, and try to kind of stage a dialogue between what people in our field are currently saying and what people in the tradition of the humanities have said, to kind of find opportunities for further exploration or reveal gaps, and this works both ways. I don't mean to go from A to B. It actually, both sides can inform each other. There may be things that people in HCI are focusing on that nobody in the philosophy of art has ever thought of. And I definitely want to reflect that sort of thing too. And the outcome of this work, first of all, is I think one of the things that we've seen in reporting on social science is that there are certain types of argument, certain templates or logic or rhetorics that we can use that make it fairly easy to communicate to others the rigor of our research, the importance of our research, the findings of our research, and the implications of our research. I don't think we have very good rhetorics or logics for research through design yet. I see presentations at CHI and other places where people are doing some work that I find really exciting, but I find the papers themselves often to be very uneven. Maybe the first half really fires me up and the second half is a big yawn. Or sometimes it's the other way around. Actually it's usually that way. Usually they start great and then they fizzle. And they fizzle precisely at the point where they're telling us what they learned and what its significance is as research. So I hope that I can develop some argument types. And I want to test it out by articulating several designs as inquiries. I want to do it myself and see if I can make it work. And I hope that this whole project will thus give me some way then to confront the skeptical attack, to take it seriously, to respect it, but also to answer it and mount a defense. That's the intention. The bad news is, for you, sorry, is that I've only really done the first part of this. It's a multi-year project. And so most of what I'm going to talk about today really reflects from this first part, and unfortunately not the second and third part, but I encourage you to buy the book, and I encourage you to write it. Okay, so that having been said, I'm going to talk a little bit about AngloAmerican Aesthetics, because this is a tradition of thought that has very explicitly asked questions about the relationships between the arts and understanding, and it has asked these questions also in relation to the philosophy of science. And so in a way it's a very nice body of thought to try to help me understand how research or design can communicate with, can sit side by side with empirical social science, for example. Lots of people hate it. Actually, most of my friends, actually every single one of my friends hates this philosophy. Most of them dismiss it and prefer so-called continental philosophy. I won't get into all of that. But all I will say is if you're familiar with analytic versus continental philosophy, if that's kind of your thing, and if you're hating on me right now for doing this, all I'm saying is I'm not advocating this as a theory of art. What I'm saying is this theory of art gives me resources to think about the research issue of design, which is specifically its cognitive potential. So what does it say? One of the first most basic things is that art has something to say about reality. And this is a quote here from John Gibson. Or actually, no, it's a paraphrase from John Gibson. He says that James Baldwin's story, and this is a picture of James Baldwin here, Going to Meet the Man, it describes the lynching of a black man by white racists. And that helps us understand something about the experience of racism in the United States. Its cause, its triggers, its implications in diverse aspects of everyday life, how it is experienced and understood by different people. Gibson also credits Baldwin for integrating the phenomenon of lynching with fear of black sexuality. So this novel actually teaches us something, really helps in a deeper way understand something about this phenomenon that matters so much. Here's another quote from John Gibson. Concepts such as racism or the creation of the world in art are not mere ideas, they do more. They give shape, form, and structure to the range of values, concerns, and experiences that define human reality. So this is, of course, the Sistine Chapel. And it's Michelangelo's painting of the origins of the world. And in it, he does more than just communicate facts about the origins of the world according to his theology. But he structures it, he orders it, he calls our attention to certain things. He makes us focus on certain aspects of that as a way to make us as viewers more sympathetic to the religion and the ideas behind it that he wants us to understand. This is from philosopher Richard Eldridge. Human life continually represents materials about which we do not know exactly how to feel and judge. For example, most of us do not exactly know how to feel about technology in the future. We can wish to have our puzzlement worked out, worked through, and clarified, and successful art brings clarity without oversimplifying. So this is an image from Blade Runner, a 1982 science fiction film that presented a view of the future that still resonates today. One more, this is the final quote in this particular group. Gordon Graham writes that the question to be asked of an artwork is not, is this how it really was? That's what the skeptic asks. All right, that's what you ask Andrea. When she says, well, I was in these homes and this is what I saw, you're supposed to sit there and say, is that how it really was? Is what she's saying how it really was there? Is she exaggerating? Is she cherry picking? Right? That's what you're supposed to do. But for Gordon Graham, he says the question to be asked in artwork is not that, but rather, does this make us alive to new aspects of this sort of occasion? And I like this phrase, to make us alive to. Because I think good designs do make us alive to certain phenomena or to certain sorts of occasion. And I think that's a knowledge contribution. I'm not going to read through all these, you don't have to read through all of these, but they do give you a quick glimpse of some of the different types of assertion. This is answering your question earlier. Certain types of assertion that people have made about ways that art contributes to knowledge. They don't add up to a coherent theory, so they're not cumulative in any sense. These are, in a sense, cherry-picked. They're just picked out of literature and thrown up on a slide, but mainly to give you a sense of the different sorts of statements that are there, and to help perhaps remind you of what you already know about the art, but might forget, might have forgotten with your training. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to focus on 4 of these. So I'm going to look at these particular 4 statements, and I'm going to read each one side by side with a design. And I'm going to talk through how I think that design does this work. And then later in my conclusion, I'll come back and see if I can step back and make some cumulative statements about what all the designs and all the statements together start to bring into view for us. So I'll start with the first one, because this is the one that's intuitive to most of us. That knowledge is conceptual, knowledge is propositional. I'm going to start just to define that, just in case, just to make sure you know what I mean by propositional knowledge. These are some propositional statements from different disciplines, and they basically just assert something. And typically when we think of knowledge, or when we think of research, we're thinking of these sorts of statements. And in fact, it was this sort of statement that Andrea was advised to put on her final slide. Propositional statement. Tell us what we've learned. Tell us what the take home is. Okay, so the question that I'm asking is, can designs ever produce these kinds of statements? Is this genre, is a proposition, something that a design can do? And I'm going to do this by looking at a particular design called Menstruation Machine. Has anybody heard of this? Okay, not many, but a few people. This is a 2010 design by Hiromi Ozaki, also known as Sputniko. As its name suggests, it is a wearable device that simulates menstruation. It's a special belt that releases blood at the same rate that the average woman menstruates, and it also uses electric stimulation to cause abdominal cramping. So here's a quote from her. This is the artist's statement, basically almost everything she said about it, other than some interviews. It's 2010, so why are humans still menstruating? What does menstruation mean to humans? Fitted with a blood dispensing mechanism and lower abdomen stimulating electrodes, the menstruation machine simulates the pain and bleeding of an average 5-day menstruation process of a human. But the awesome thing about Menstruation Machine is that it's also a music video. And I'm going to show you a clip of it now, and we're going to hope the audio works this time too. So you get a flavor of that. It actually goes on for about 3 minutes. It's fascinating. I recommend you go to YouTube and watch the whole thing. It's a pretty interesting piece of work. And here's another image of it, a cross section. So in research through design literature, it's very common to refer to individual designs as proposals. And being the literal-minded person that I am, I'll try to take that question on as squarely and directly as I can. What does a system like Menstruation Machine propose? And I'm going to go through and I'm going to give you several propositional statements that I think of this proposal. We'll see where they lead us. One is that menstruation is a design material. That is the materiality of menstruation, measurable in milliliters of blood, and the amount of force generated by muscle contractions can be used as the raw materials out of which to make a design. Number 2, menstruation is desirable. This is, of course, the most critical move, the one that everybody instantly understands and feels challenged by and feels compelled in some way or another to respond to in order to make heads or tails of it. Number 3, that menstruation can be simulated. That is, it's not the kind of experience that's irretrievably locked inside of an individual's private, subjectively felt body, but it's something that can be simulated on other bodies. Number 4, menstruation is merely physiological. This is arguably the easiest aspect of the design to object to. There are several books like this. This is just one of them called The Curse, A Cultural History of Menstruation, which will, if you believe that it's merely physiological, this book will correct you, will disabuse you of that knowledge forthwith. Number 5, medical devices should be designed for lifestyle and fashion. So we often intuit that medical devices are ugly and should only support medical needs in the most economical and functional sort of way. But Menstruation Machine proposes that medical devices can be used to support lifestyles and fashion. Number 6, technological innovation is sexist. This is something that the artist herself makes explicit. She says in an interview, "I wanted to illustrate how technology doesn't evolve fairly. Japan took more than 10 years to approve contraceptive pills, but took only 6 months to approve Viagra." Number 7, a feminine performance is not real unless it has the possibility of menstruation. The video scenario that we saw in the video is supposed to be a cross-dresser, somebody who's biologically male, cross-dressing as a woman, and that to be more authentic, to achieve that higher plane of performing or being a woman, menstruation has to be a part of that. And that's why one of the reasons I selected the excerpt I did is the text kept saying, do you really want to know? Do you really want to know how it feels? Do you really, really, really? The word real appeared more than any other word. And so she's asserting in the video that there's some reality to this. This is not just a fantasy. Okay, I'm going to stop with that. And of course, a person could generate a lot more, and if you were to generate propositions, you might get different ones, and I'm not claiming that I've got the right ones or anything like that. But I hope at least you understand why I say that the design proposes each of these things. But I think one of the things that's interesting about this, one of the reasons we like propositional reasoning, is that we can then actually manipulate it. We can subject it to logic. We can explore its implications. We can put it into arguments. And so I think once it's re-articulated in this form, we can do some of that work. So if we agree that Menstruation Machine proposes an argument, then the next move is to see how that argument functions as a statement in relation to other arguments. In this case, I will take it up in relation to feminist discourses on gender, and in particular debates on gender essentialism. For those of you who don't know, just a quick definition, gender essentialism is the controversial view that all women have some universal something that is essential to them that no men have, and therefore that universally distinguishes men from women and women's experiences from men's. And so the question then is, how does Menstruation Machine as a set of propositions relate itself into this debate, this discourse, as a knowledge contribution? And the answer is it's a little bit complicated. So what I want to do is I want to look at propositions 3 and 7. Proposition 3 is that menstruation can be simulated. And this seems not to be an essentialist position because it reduces menstruation to measurable physiology, which can be enacted on anyone's body. Menstruation becomes gender portable. But proposition 7 seems to go the other direction. It does seem to commit to an essentialist position because according to it, in order to be real, a feminine performance has to have, as a necessary, if not sufficient condition, the experience of menstruation during it. And so what I'm trying to argue now is basically that Menstruation Machine offers a set of complex propositions about menstruation, including its ontology in the context of biological sex and its implications in gender politics. But the propositions themselves do not add up. They're not resolved. They do not finally come across as a single, unified, coherent, straightforward position. And yet, the design form is. And I think that's part of what makes this interesting. Logically, propositionally, it's complex, maybe even internally self-contradictory, but formally and materially, it's very unified. It's very cogent. And so that cogence, that material unity, in a way, serves as a signifier, as a dense sign that helps us understand all of the complexity of these debates and the meanings of menstruation, including ways that we might rethink menstruation as a space in which we should think about design.
Can I ask just to interject a question?
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to understand these, and I don't understand what is the design. So it seems that this picture here is of the design. But you also showed me a music video, which is, it seems itself, a different design. And you talked about quotes that the artist gave about, for instance, men and women, Viagra, etc. That to me seems like even third design.
Yeah.
They seem like different designs to me. And I'm just wondering if you could help me understand the interplay of these pieces together.
Oh, that's a delicious question. I think you're exactly right to point that out. And I think that, yes, so there is this object, which is, I believe, in a museum now, and in some sense we can point to that object, that thing, and say that there is the design. We can also point to the body of work, which involves the artist statement and the music video and the sketches and the photographs and the concept, and all of that kind of stuff. And we can say that is the design. And I think the way that I would resist ultimately saying that one is and that one isn't. What I would rather say is, and here I'm borrowing a concept from, I think it's Martin Seal, who I haven't read, but a co-author in a paper talked about this, and that's what I'm now thinking of. It's kind of awkward, but there you go. He talks about the aesthetics of appearing, and he says that we never know an aesthetic object. We never, you can read Pride and Prejudice, or you can look at Andy Warhol's Brillo box. But at any given time, that object appears to us in ways that we are prepared to understand it or want to understand it. But that doesn't mean we ever actually get to the real thing. And so I think in the case of this, I don't see that there's a real thing. I'm going to talk later about the role of text, because you asked about the interviews. And also there's this artist statement. And everything I'm doing is verbal commentary right now. So I think there is a role for the verbal to be understood in all this too. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. But that's definitely a great question. Okay. So I think what I like about Menstruation Machine is it makes us confront the idea that it provides humans with a different form of access to menstruation than has been available before. And as a designer, I find that statement really interesting because I can paraphrase, I can transform it into this. In what ways can machines provide humans with different forms of access to gendered body experiences that has been available before? And of course, why would we want to do that? And what would it mean and under what circumstances and so on and so forth? So I think that this is a generative design question because it expands our sense for what constitutes design materials. That is, gendered bodied experiences become a design material, and by doing so, it expands the possibility for relevant forms of computing. And so I would argue, therefore, that is a contribution to knowledge. Again, not in the same way that Andreas was a contribution to knowledge. And so that I will stop that particular notion here. Kind of an odd thought experiment. The next, oh yes, sorry.
You talked about the design creating propositions.
Yes.
Do designs also provide evidence for or against propositions?
Well, yeah. I think it does, and I think that Menstruation Machine, I think those contradictory propositions themselves. That's how I understand the answer to your question, but maybe you're asking it on a different level or with a different scope than I'm hearing it.
Do you think the design is providing evidence that for or against the? I guess I'm not seeing how it's maybe just tell me again how it's doing, because I guess I'm not seeing why those are evidence. It seems like those are assertions.
Okay, I think I'm hearing you. So, and maybe this goes back to, in a sense, to your question. I think the design makes certain assertions. Then the ways in which it supports or provides an evidentiary basis to believe that those assertions are credible, maybe that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
First of all, I think it does. However, clearly not with the same sort of clarity and directness that we expect from other forms of research. But I do think there are ways that it does so. For example, Sputnikov, the designer, worked with a professor of obstetrics. I always stumble over, I always mispronounce that word. But this is a person who is a researcher of obstetrics. And so part of this was to actually replicate in a very medically serious and correct way the physiological dimensions of menstruation. And so that then becomes a rhetoric, I would argue, of legitimation. I would say that the polished and elegant nature of its form is a kind of evidence of the kind of thought and effort that went into the piece. But these are not the same kind of arguments, for sure, you know, that Andrew was making earlier on. And there's the other side of this, which I think comes back to your question, is how much of this does the design say or assert? And how much of this is me speaking on behalf of the design? And I think that's actually a really difficult question to answer as well. And one that I've gone back and forth on, because I think one of the issues that I've seen in a lot of philosophy is people have said of philosophers, well, you know, you're the one who's doing the inquiry. So Arthur Danto, for example, is a philosopher who's talked a lot about Brillo box, which was on my first slide. Do you all know about Brillo box, the Andy Warhol? It's a box that for soap pads that you use to wash your dishes. And in the 1960s, you would find these things all over the place in your supermarket. And Andy Warhol, the artist, then went and took that box and he made a replica of it. He hand painted a replica of it and put it in a museum and called it a sculpture. And so that's the basic idea behind that Brillo box. And this philosopher, Arthur Danto, has spent like literally 30 years. He just died last year. He spent literally 30 years trying to figure out what is going on there and why, because you cannot discern, you cannot distinguish one Brillo box from another, except that one of them is literally worthless and the other is literally worth millions. So there are distinctions. And so Danto, as a philosopher, wanted to explain all of that. But then people said, well, it's not Brillo box that actually did that work, it's you as a philosopher. This is a question I go back and forth on a little bit. To what extent does the object prompt certain types of thinking, and to what extent is the thinking brought to it by our existing concerns, with the caveat that our existing concerns surely are known to Warhol when he makes the box in the first place, and that's one of the reasons he made that box. So there's some chicken and egg issues. Anyway, this is not a really satisfactory answer to your question. I'm not sure there is one.
Maybe I asked this right. Those are all great and inspiring, but maybe it was what I needed was something simpler, which is just it makes it clear how self-contradictory some of these assertions may be.
Yes.
That the position of gender essentialism
yeah, okay.
can't be, is incoherent, and this makes it clear that it's incoherent.
And this offers evidence about why, because if that were the case, then that's.
Well, so if sorry, just to interject, but the gender essentialism is kind of what brought this to mind, because it seems to me that one of the designs speaks to one of those propositions and another design speaks to another. So the design of the music video speaks to you can only have this real experience if you're really a woman, but the device to me speaks to the other. It says, no, this experience is transportable between people. You can have it by using the device. And that's why I felt there were two designs maybe being
I agree. And I think there's, you know, in literary theory they call it indeterminacy, when you have a text or a work that is compatible with multiple possible interpretations, which may be irrelevant to each other or cannot or contradictory of each other, and there's actually no textual mechanism by which you can resolve that. And I think that's part of what makes this kind of work interesting, but also part of what makes it hard to explicate as in traditional sense of research. So anyway, I think I'm running behind, so I'm gonna move forward. I apologize because I love this conversation, but probably I should get through this. So the second idea is that knowledge is a movement of thought from the secure to a new conclusion using a systematic process such as repetition and simulation. And we see this this is just a very basic syllogism from Aristotle. All men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. But we also see it in something like Bach's Goldberg variations, where we have a theme, and then we have 30 different variations of that theme. And so clearly there's some kind of constructive search that's happening. Obviously, if he thought he was done after the aria, he wouldn't have made 30 variations of it. So there's something going on there in those 30 variations that can't be done in the first one. I'm going to get scary for a few minutes and talk about the Alien movies, actually, as a way of doing this. But I want to introduce a couple concepts from philosophy that I think help us read the Alien films in a little bit richer of a way. And I'll start with Noel Carroll, who is a analytic philosopher who's written a lot on horror film and horror fiction. And he says that all horror fictions contain a monster, an animal, a human, an alien, zombie, vampire, whatever it is, and that this monster cannot be explained by science. If it's a fantasy creature, biology can't explain it. If it's a monstrous human, such as Hannibal Lecter, psychology can't explain it. And that this monster invokes in us two feelings, one of fear and another of disgust. Fear because the monster is threatening to our bodies, it can kill us, it can hurt us, it can make us do things we don't want to do. And disgust because it's impure, it's dirty in some kind of awful way. And and what he means by that is that it violates our conceptual categories. And let's look at the aliens here. It's really obvious how they induce fear in us. They're like 9 feet tall, they run 10 times faster than us, and they rip our bodies apart and do even worse, which I'll show pictures of in a moment. But why do they make us feel disgust? And this is not my reading. This is quite a common reading now. They invoke disgust because they bring 3 separate conceptions together into a single, coherent, horrifically coherent image, and that is human rationality, reptiles, and sexuality. And some of you, when you watch the Alien films, may not have been thinking about sexuality while you were watching it. And so you might be a little surprised by that. But as soon as I show you the next several slides, you won't be able to unsee that anymore. But before I get to that, I just want to say, screw it, I don't have time. Let's just get right to the dirty pictures. So this is a sketch drawing from H.R. Geiger. I don't know, is it Geiger? Is that how you say it? Geiger? I've heard it. Does anybody know the correct way? No? Okay, good. Well then. Geiger. I say it with authority. Geiger's initial illustrations for the aliens were deemed too close to human genitalia. And he was actually forced to change it, but this is what he originally wanted the alien head to look like. But it doesn't stop with genitalia. There's also this terrifying metaphor of sexual penetration when these face huggers jump on you, hold your face, and then they shoot something to penetrate your mouth and implant their seed in you. And of course that leads to your moments of pregnancy, which is glowing. This scene is terrifying because the alien doesn't kill her, and the reason it doesn't kill her is because she's pregnant with its offspring, and that's when she realizes, when it doesn't kill her, she realizes it must be because she's carrying its offspring, and we as viewers see that too, and it creeps us out, and it makes us feel just horrible. Then of course this is what made aliens famous, the birth scenes, where the alien explodes out of the chest of the host. And finally, the newborn ward. This is in the fourth Aliens film, where she dies at the end of the third. And so in order to have a sequel, we need some account of how to bring her back to life. So they try to clone her. But interestingly, they had several cloning experiments fail. And so what we get is this monstrous Ripley, Sigourney Weaver alien hybrids, all these different variations of them, some of which are sentient and alive when she encounters them in the Ward, one of which even asked her to kill it and put it out of its misery. So the alien films, like Bach, introduce a theme and many variations. Philosopher Nelson Goodman writes, establishment and modification of motifs, abstraction and elaboration of patterns, differentiation and interrelation of modes of transformation are all processes of constructive search. And the measures applicable are not those of passive enjoyment, but those of cognitive efficacy, delicacy of discrimination, power of integration, and justice of proportion between recognition and discovery. So the theme of the alien films, I think, has to do with human rationality and its relations to sexual violence. And the films are cognitive, that is, they contribute to understanding, because they force us to confront the ways that sex and sexual violence are manifested in our world. And it forces audiences to have a metaphorical experience of sexuality's potential to produce terror. Go on to my third claim here, that knowledge claims are also obligations. And I'm going to start this one with a thought experiment from philosopher John Gibson, who says, imagine you're walking along the street and two cars crash, and only you and one other guy are there. And now imagine that guy says, whoa, I totally need to Instagram this. You would say, what's wrong with this guy? There's been a car accident. People are injured. There's a high risk that other people could become injured by this. You know what you should do. You need to intervene. You need to jump in and make sure everybody's okay. What you shouldn't be doing is putting it on Instagram. And so what Gibson says is, what you're actually asking is, does this guy not understand what a car crash actually means? There's no question whether or not he knows there's been a car crash. The question is, does he understand what it means? And the point of the story is that knowledge is not enough. Certainty is not enough. We have to acknowledge what this means. So there's a moral world too. And what sorts of obligations does this knowledge, does this new information place us under? So here we know there's been an accident, and we understand that people are in need, and we have an obligation to help them. And I think that this is important. I think part of Gibson's point here is that epistemically, for science to do science, one of the fundamental things is to try to achieve a certain level of objectivity, is to try to set yourself out of the situation far enough that you can see it for what it is, rather than seeing it in an interested way. And that without that move, science itself collapses. And so this is not a criticism of that, but it is to say, what are the consequences of that? What are the consequences if we make that move, but we don't then step back as a second move to then ask, what are the consequences? What does this mean? And another way to ask that is there some way, some methodological or structural way to ensure that we as in the scientific community make that second move to come back? And I think actually design is one way to do that. So I'm going to talk about porcupine dress. Has anybody seen this before? Okay, well, this is the second in a series of defensive dresses. It allows the user to imitate the defensive quill erecting behavior of a porcupine. It has 30 oven-baked, hand-painted quills that prick up when the wearer detects the threat and bends their back into a fetal position. And it's, like I said, it's one of a series of 3. Here's 2 others. It's the blowfish dress. If an attacker gets close, it inflates. You can't get to the person. And the skink dress, you know what a skink is? It's like a little lizard. If you grab its tail, the tail just falls off. And so if you try to grab the woman, the dress will just come apart in your hands, and you'll never be able to get your hand on her. So clearly, we can all see what's going on here. She's using biomimicry to adopt a defensive mechanism of an organism, puts it in a dress. I would stress that the dresses are all fashionable in a fairly traditional sense. The choice of fabrics, the feminine silhouettes, the color palettes, the fit on the body. She calls these cocktail dresses. I think we can all see what makes them cocktail dresses. Wow, okay. So I have to keep going here. But the difference is the attacker is not a natural predator, but most likely a man seeking to assault her. So clothing is here proposed not to protect the body from the elements, but from social ills such as sexual assault and violence against women. So I want to return to this question of skepticism, and I want to ask, just as a thought experiment, what would the skeptic do? And I think the skeptic would ask questions like this. Has Gadani experienced gendered violence firsthand? If not, on what basis could she truly understand this issue? If she has, how could this dress mean the same thing for somebody else that it does for her? Does one have to be the victim of gender or sexual violence to understand this dress? And I think these questions miss the point. And I think there's a better set of questions that we can ask to get more at what does this make us alive to? What does this make us acknowledge? Do we as a society want clothing to protect us not just from the elements, but also from social ills? This dress gives the woman some kind of agency. Is this the kind of agency that we want to give? If a woman wears this dress and her friend does not, and the friend gets attacked, is it her fault for not protecting herself? Should the quills actually be able to injure someone? How else might we introduce biomimicry into the languages of fashion and for what? So I'm going to skip to this quote here. To count as possessing full understanding of something, we must reveal not only that we have relevant concepts and representational capacities, we must also show that we are alive to those patterns of value, significance, and meaning that are woven into the aspects of the world we otherwise merely imagine. And I think that Gadani actually does a very good job of bringing some of those sorts of issues up. Okay, the fourth one. What time do I have to stop?
Wait, and there's another class waiting to come in right now. They're really queuing up.
Do they start at 15?
No,
it's 5 minutes.
They start now?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we're totally SOL. All right. Well, then I'm just going to stop then. But I'm not even done, so I apologize. But maybe, yeah, I really don't, I don't even know how to summarize this. I hate to make another class wait. Let me just end it on this thought. Where did they go? One of the reasons I picked all the examples I did, and I only got through 3 or 4 of them, was to show that our conceptual schema regarding personhood are blurry today. And part of the reason why is modern biotechnoscience. And so that's something that we want some clarity on. This statement I think we all agree with, but as stated, it's banal, it's bland, it's boring, it's not that interesting. But when we look at Menstruation Machine with its non-binary gender, its medical device fashion, the aliens, porcupine dress, example I didn't show you, when we put all these together, what we see is they do more than offer a proposition about changing personhood. They order and they stage and they imaginatively explore conceptual possibilities and their significances, and they reveal design opportunities, and they reveal design problem framings that allow us to think and be creative and enter into interventionary stances that never occurred to us before. And that, I think, is a research contribution. That, I think, is a knowledge contribution. So, lots more, but the end. Thank you.